Hello and welcome to my channel. If you haven't been to my channel before, I'm going through all the books that I read in January and February. I have a lot of really good ones, so I'm excited to talk about them. I want to go in order of how I read them, so I'm gonna look on my Goodreads and see. The first book that I started off the year with was Daisy Jones and the Six, which recently just came out as a show too. It's on Amazon Prime. This became one of my new favorite books, and it really doesn't surprise me because Taylor Jenkins Reid books always become like I feel like every single time I read one, I'm like, wow, that's one that I'm gonna like recommend to people. I'm gonna remember it. I'm gonna talk about it to people. It always ends up happening. I've only read 3 of her books: Daisy Jones and the Six, One True Loves, and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but all 3 of those were so good. This one is my favorite. It was super entertaining and really easy to get into. I did listen to the audiobook. I had the book open on my bed and I was like doing stuff around my room listening to the audiobook and like running back to the book to like annotate it as I was listening to it. I think it enhances the experience. I've never read this on its own, but it's written in an interview like style, so when you listen to it, it really just sounds like you're listening to an interview, but it's not like in the way that maybe if you think of listening to an interview it would sound like it's boring, but this is not. Taylor Jenkins Reid in this book and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, she does a really good job of turning an interview into like a story. You're listening to an interview, but you just completely got sucked into the story. This book follows a band, like an up-and-coming band, and there's this girl who is like a singer-songwriter. She kind of becomes in this band, and it's like the Daisy Jones and the Six. Basically what this book does is it makes it seem like the band, like these are real people in the band doing these interviews. Like there's even songs in the back of it that are like full songs that they've written, just typed out, and now there's an actual like Daisy Jones and the Six album. You really get to know the characters so intimately to where you love them, but then you're also like, you get like so frustrated with them. They're like self-sabotaging characters, you know, where you're just like, why are you doing that? And really at the core of this book was like this unspoken love story. I'd say there's really like 3 characters in this, where there's like kind of this love triangle story and this love that's like a denial of being in love, and this really like frustrating words unspoken and promises being broken. That right? Next up, I read Curse of the Wolf King. This one feels like forever ago when I read it. I really enjoyed this book. I wouldn't say this is like one of the most memorable books that I read or that it made like a huge impact on me, but I just really enjoyed reading it and I didn't get bored. The world building wasn't so intense that it was hard to get into, so if you're someone who like doesn't really like a lot of world building, I feel like you would like this one. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling with Faye. The girl in this has moved to a new place because she's trying to escape these like rumors about her. So when she moves to this new place, she's like very reserved. She does not want to get married or anything. She doesn't want love and she's not looking for it. She like specifically is trying to avoid it, but she really wants a job because she wants to be able to support herself. She gets this job offer and she's like walking to the house where the job offer is. She ends up being held hostage in this house where she thought she was having the interview, and there's like a wolf king that lives there and he's trying to use her to get something, but instead you could probably guess what happens. So yeah, I'd probably give this one like a 3.954 stars, like in that. Next up, I read one of my favorite books of the year so far. This one and Daisy Jones and the Six. I think these are both my favorites so far. The Dead Romantics. I feel like this book, like I'm just so happy I read it. The Dead Romantics is so unique and so beautiful. It honestly blew me away. This book had similar themes to Curse of the Wolf King, which I thought was so funny because I was like, I just read this one right after that one. The reoccurring theme in these 2 books was that love is worth it. Even if it's fleeting, even if it doesn't last, it's still worth the loving and having that love at some point, you know? Florence Day, the main character, she has this thing where she could talk to ghosts and see ghosts, and it's something that when she was younger, it got her in a little bit, it made her like kind of an outcast because she solved someone's murder. Because she solved someone's murder and she claimed that she did it by seeing ghosts, it was like in the newspapers and stuff, and like people were like really mean to her. There's a lot of stuff that made her basically flee. So she ran away from home. Now she's like a ghost writer. There is a good bit of puns in this book. She's a ghostwriter for a really famous and successful romance author. She had like a long-term relationship and then something happened and she got her heart broken, so she was like, okay, romance is dead. I don't believe in love anymore. I don't want to be a ghostwriter for romance books anymore, or like I don't want to write any more romance books. So she goes to tell her editor that, but there's a new editor in town and this editor was like, no, you can't stop writing romance books. Like that's the whole point of what this is. You have to write romance. Something happens where she has to go home and someone shows up at the door and she opens it and it's the ghost of her editor. So basically now she has a dead hot ghost editor, and she is going to maybe believe that romance isn't actually dead even though he's dead. So that is the story. I would really recommend not letting the fact that the romantic interest in this book is dead like stop you from reading it, because it's so good. Like, just please give it a chance. It's worth it, and it's one of the most impactful books that I've read this year. So yeah. January was such a good reading month for me because the next book that I read, I also loved it a lot. Next, I read Furyborn. This is part of a trilogy, and I'm actually reading the second one right now. One thing about matte like book covers is you could see all your little fingerprints on there, and I just, you know, I used to love these ones the most because they look cool, but they only look cool like if you just haven't touched them. And then I've also tried to like wipe it off, but then it doesn't actually wipe off. This is a fantasy, and I would say this one has a pretty good amount of world building. In the very beginning, I was like, whoa, what are all these words? But then I quickly got into it, and once I was into it, I was obsessed with it. The story is so good, and like the concept, the world, it's unique and really just a cool fantasy world. This book switches between two timelines of two different queens. So there's a queen of the past and a queen of the future, and you're reading both of them. I kind of switch back and forth between whose like perspective or POV I felt more connected with. I think like by the time this book ended, I felt more connected with the future queens, which I think is how it's maybe supposed to be. I'm not completely sure, but it kind of would make sense because like one story has ended and one story is like ongoing. So one story, anything could happen, and one is kind of like you end up knowing what happens. It's just kind of unraveling. Their stories take place 1,000 years apart. The two queens are actually connected in a really special way, but you don't end up finding that out until later on. One of the queens is prophesized to just bring destruction to the world, and the other one's prophesized to bring light and like a change. But there's another factor that's kind of going against both of the queens throughout all of these years, and that is the divine intervention that takes place in this book. So angels in this book, they can be good or bad. I feel like I can't even really say that much because I don't really want to give a lot of it away, but just know that it's really good. The present queen is actually, she doesn't know that she's a queen, neither does the first one at first, but she has like all these elemental powers. So they're like, oh, only the queen could have all of those elemental powers, and they make her go through like all these trials where she can like almost die and stuff. And then the present queen is actually kind of tracked down by someone who ends up being her love interest. But before she's tracked down, she's doing what she has to do to survive and provide for her family, and she's actually an assassin. Eliana, the second queen, is just such a cool character in my opinion. She's very morally gray, but she also kind of just shut off her feelings or tried the best that she could for a really long time, and now someone new's coming along and they're like making her face everything that she's done and just kind of like change everything and shake up her life. I'm gonna keep on reading the series, but I have no doubt that they're gonna be really good because this book was just that, it was that good. Next up, I read the 4th Bridgerton book, but it's going to be the 3rd season coming out on Netflix. They just kind of like did out of order. I don't know why. I guess it does kind of make sense because by the end of the 2nd season, they're kind of like, it's coming to like a point where they seem like they're going to happen really soon. So this is Colin and Penelope's love story, and this was the one that I was most excited for because I just find the fact that she's her like so interesting, her character. And the book, you know, it was good and fun and steamy and just fluffy. It was also really fun to read from Penelope's perspective because she's just such a witty character and thinks of so many funny little things, and very observant character. So it was really cool to like read and see the whole Bridgerton world through her eyes, even though it's a bit different in the books. Not very different, but like just a little bit different. Now on to things that I didn't really like about this book, because this one's probably the one that I liked least out of all the books that I read. And my big thing with this one is that the conflict, like the big conflict, happened in the middle-ish, like maybe the middle end-ish, like maybe like right here or so. There was like a little conflict towards the end, but I didn't really care all that much about that conflict. I just didn't think it was that interesting after there was that huge conflict, and I think it lost some of its momentum for me. Also, Colin, I get where his story was going, and I know like his character development was really happening, and I got to see like a little side of him that you don't get to see in the shows, and I really liked seeing that. But I hope he's like kind of different in the show. Kind of got frustrated with him a couple of times, and I think that Penelope also got frustrated, so you're kind of, I guess, meant to get frustrated. Sometimes I was feeling like Penelope was just a bit too good for him, honestly. It just kind of fell flat for me. I think I gave it 3 stars, and I would probably stick with that. It wasn't a complete waste of time. I did like enjoy some parts of it a lot. I just wouldn't go ahead and recommend this Bridgerton book to everyone, but I'd be open to reading other Bridgerton books. Next, I read Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute. This is definitely one of my favorite YA romances that I've ever read. It follows 2 childhood, like, best friends to rivals, and then they have to work together when they are in high school and kind of like rekindle and rehash everything. Throughout all this time that they're not friends, they both don't really understand where the other one is coming from. There's a lot of like miscommunication all those years, but when they finally get together again, there's not all that miscommunication, so it's not like super frustrating or anything. These characters are so funny. Like, their banter, I really loved reading about their banter because I was actually laughing and smiling like every 3 pages. Not only was their banter really good, but they also are just some of my favorite characters that I've ever read about. Like, they both are so lovely. They're just so wholesome, and if you read this book, there's no way that your heart doesn't just like warm up and feel like it's just being hugged. Like, there's just no way. The reason why they have to work together is because they're trying to get like a scholarship, and they're doing this thing where they're like camping outdoors and stuff, so a lot of it takes place camping. In their thoughts, they dislike each other so much that they're like kind of obsessing of each other. Like, if you've ever read Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, like the vibe between them, not like the academic rivals vibe, but the like thinking about them so much that they dislike them that it's kind of like, okay, are you like obsessed with them? That is what like their thoughts remind me of in this one. These are actually both YA, but I would say this one reads as like a younger YA, where that one reads as older, and also this one is not the youngest YA sounding one when you're reading it. It's more so like medium. Last but not least, I finished off February with Bloodmarked, and I loved it so much. I listened to the audiobook because I was just having such a hard time reading anything. I was going through like a reading slump. I'm actually still in it. Audiobooks really changed the game for me. I'm on like my 5th random app free subscription trial. I really enjoyed this audiobook. I think the narrator did a great job. There was only one voice actor, but they did so good. If you haven't read Legendborn, that's the first book to the series, I really recommend it. It's so good. This is the first book. It's a YA fantasy. I think it's going to be a trilogy. It's like a coming of age. She's also dealing with grieving the death of her mother while discovering the secret society in her school and the magic that she has. I think this sequel just went in a really cool direction, and I actually liked this one more. I thought it was more fun. You know, in a fantasy series, when the characters just kind of start branching out from authority and doing their own little thing and being like a rebellious little found family, that is what happens in this one, and I love it so much when that happens. Not only that, but like the love interest that I feel like a lot of people might be most excited about, because you know how there's like the golden retriever romance, and then there's like the mysterious one. Well, this one follows like the mysterious one. I don't know like how she's gonna end up, but I don't know. I just think that this is an interesting one. It's an interesting one to explore. So if you haven't read Legendborn yet, you should read it. And once you read that one, Bloodmarked is really good too. I just wish the other one was out already, because now I really want to read the other one. And you can listen to the audiobook. Those are all the books that I read in January and February. Thank you so much for watching. And oh, if you want, I said this in the last video too, but people actually befriended me on Goodreads. So if you want to check out my Goodreads, it's going to be in the description, because I don't know, I like having people to see their little updates and stuff on there, even though I don't really update that much. But I just, you know, I do put like the books that I read on there, and you could see, if you go on there, you could see how behind I am on my reading challenge. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my videos, more of my book videos, and I will see you in the next one.